Welcome everyone. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And also where you from? And what time are you watching? Now put your headset on and relax. Dr. Vincent Hale always believed that memories defined a person. As a professor of cognitive psychology, he spent his life unraveling the mysteries of the human mind, studying the fragile mechanisms that stored, altered, and sometimes erased memories. He had lectured about repression, how trauma could carve gaps in the psyche, how the brain, in its desperate attempt to protect, could lock away the most painful truths. But lately, Vincent had begun questioning his own mind. The gaps in his own memory were minor at first: lost train of thought, misplaced keys, forgotten names. He chalked them up to stress. But the blackouts were harder to ignore. Entire evenings would dissolve into nothingness, hours stolen without explanation. The feeling was like waking up in an unfamiliar room, unable to recall how you got there. He told no one. A memory expert suffering from memory loss? The irony was unbearable. Then came the invitation. It arrived in his mailbox on a gray October evening, tucked between utility bills and university notices. The envelope was yellowed with age, its corners softened as if it had been handled too many times. There was no return address, no postage stamp. Vincent frowned, tearing it open. A single card slid into his palm. You are cordially invited to visit the Library of Unwritten Memories. No date, no time. Just those words centered in black ink, perfectly neat. Vincent's fingers tightened around the card. There was something unsettlingly familiar about the name. It stirred something in his chest, a distant echo of déjà vu, a whisper of a thought just beyond reach. He turned the card over. Nothing. He stared at it, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Then the whispers started. Soft, indistinct. They weren't coming from the room, no, they were inside his head. Faint voices, overlapping, whispering fragments of words he couldn't decipher. Vincent shut his eyes and pressed his fingers to his temples. I'm tired. I'm just tired. When he opened them again, the whispers were gone. But a cold dread remained. That night, Vincent dreamed. He stood in an endless hall of bookshelves. The ceiling arched high, lost in shadows. The shelves stretched on infinitely in every direction, stacked with old, leather-bound books. There were no titles, no markings, just row after row of nameless tomes. A soft rustling filled the silence, like dry pages turning on their own. He walked forward, drawn by something unseen. His footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. At the end of the aisle, a single book sat on a wooden pedestal. Unlike the others, this one had a name engraved on its cover. Vincent Hale. A chill ran through him. He reached out. His fingers barely brushed the cover, a whisper. Right against his ear. Not yet. His eyes snapped open. Vincent sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the city outside. His pulse thundered in his ears. Just a dream. His gaze drifted to the nightstand, and his breath stopped. There, resting beside his lamp, was an old, leather-bound book. The cover was blank. The pages, when he flipped them open, were empty. Vincent pushed away from it as if burned. His chest heaved. The invitation lay beside the book. The ink, which had been crisp and sharp before, now seemed smudged, distorted, as though rewritten. The Library of Unwritten Memories. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. A door that wasn't there before the next morning, Vincent resolved to ignore the book. It had to be some elaborate trick, a cruel joke played by one of his students. He shoved it into his desk drawer and locked it. He went through his day mechanically, barely paying attention to his lectures, barely registering the concerned looks from colleagues. But the invitation lingered in his thoughts. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Vincent found himself walking through the city with no destination in mind. Or so he thought. His feet carried him down streets he didn't recognize. The buildings around him grew older, their brickwork crumbling, their windows dark and empty. The crowds thinned. The streetlights buzzed, flickering in the dusk. Then he saw it. A narrow alleyway he had never noticed before. At the end of it stood a library. It was an imposing structure, its architecture reminiscent of a forgotten era. Its massive wooden doors were carved with intricate patterns, words, he realized, in dozens of different languages. words that twisted and rearranged when he tried to focus on them. His fingers tightened around the invitation still in his pocket. He shouldn't go inside. He should turn around. But his legs carried him forward. The doors swung open before he touched them. A cold breath of air greeted him, and Vincent Hale stepped into the library of unwritten memories. The moment Vincent stepped inside, the doors groaned shut behind him. The sound echoed like the finality of a lock clicking into place. He turned sharply, his fingers brushing the cool brass of the handles. They didn't budge. A subtle unease crawled up his spine, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had come here by choice, hadn't he? The air inside the library was thick with dust and something else, something intangible. It smelled of forgotten things, of brittle pages and ink dried long ago. The walls stretched high, lost in shadow. Towering bookshelves lined the space in endless corridors, stretching far beyond what should have been possible. Vincent's breath caught. The architecture, it wasn't right. From the outside, the library had looked old but small, a forgotten relic wedged between two modern buildings. Inside, it was infinite. Am I dreaming again? Welcome, Dr. Hale. The voice was soft, yet it carried through the silence like a whisper woven into the air itself. Vincent turned to face the source. The librarian, an elderly woman, stood before him. Her appearance was unremarkable at first glance, thin, frail, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a long, black dress that looked almost like morning attire. But her eyes, they were hollow. Not empty, no, worse than that. They held something unreadable, something ancient. The kind of gaze that had seen too much. She smiled, the corners of her lips barely moving. "You've been expected," she said. Vincent hesitated. "Expected?" The woman gave a small nod. "Of course. You received the invitation, didn't you?" Vincent swallowed. He wanted to ask who sent it. Why? But somehow he knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What is this place?" The librarian's gaze flickered to the towering shelves around them. "This is the library of unwritten memories," she said. "It is where lost stories live, forgotten truths, the things people were never meant to remember." A chill ran through Vincent's bones. The words stirred something deep within him, something restless, like a locked door rattling on its hinges. "Come," she said, turning gracefully. "There is much to see." Against his better judgment, Vincent followed. The library breathed as they walked deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. Vincent became aware of a peculiar sensation. The library was alive. It was subtle at first, the flickering of shadows in his periphery, the way the books seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking. Then he heard it, a low, constant rustling, like pages turning on their own. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard whispers. The librarian moved effortlessly through the winding corridors, her footsteps silent. Vincent struggled to keep up, the wooden floor groaning under his every step. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. They turned a corner, and suddenly the endless bookshelves gave way to an open space, a circular chamber with a single wooden pedestal at its center. On the pedestal sat a book. His book. A book without a title. Vincent knew it before the librarian spoke. "This belongs to you," she said. The book was thick, its leather cover cracked with age. There was no title, no markings of any kind. His fingers hovered above it, hesitation gripping his chest like a vice. "What's inside?" he asked. The librarian studied him carefully. "Your story," she said simply. Vincent's mouth felt dry. "I already know my story." "Do you?" she murmured. A silence stretched between them. Slowly, Vincent touched the book. A shudder ran through him. The leather was cold. Too cold. The moment his fingers made contact, a sharp pain stabbed through his skull. A whisper curled into his ear, faint yet piercing. "Not yet." Vincent yanked his hand back, his breath coming fast. The pain vanished as quickly as it had come. His heart pounded. The room suddenly felt too small. He looked at the librarian. "What the hell was that?" She tilted her head slightly. "The unwritten," she said. Vincent didn't respond. He couldn't. His head was spinning. The whispers were louder now. Somewhere among the shelves, books were whispering his name. And then, just as suddenly, the voices stopped. A deafening silence followed. Vincent exhaled shakily, stepping back from the pedestal. "I think I should go," he muttered. The librarian didn't argue. She merely smiled, a knowing, hollow smile. "You may leave," she said. But the library is not done with you. Vincent turned and retraced his steps, his pulse hammering. But something was wrong. The corridors weren't the same. The path he had taken wasn't there anymore. He quickened his pace, turning corner after corner, only to find more bookshelves. No exit. His breathing grew ragged. Then a door. At the end of a narrow passage, he saw it. The same heavy wooden doors he had entered through. Relief surged through him. He lunged forward, gripping the handles, and pulled. They didn't move. Vincent tried again, harder this time. Locked. He slammed his fist against the wood. "Let me out," he growled. Silence. And then a whisper, low, rasping, right behind him. "You were never meant to leave." Vincent's blood turned to ice. He spun around, but there was no one there. Only rows upon rows of bookshelves, stretching into the dark. His breath came fast. He pressed his forehead against the door, squeezing his eyes shut. "Wake up, wake up, wake up." When he opened his eyes, the door was gone. In its place was another bookshelf, another wall of books. He was trapped, and somewhere deep within the library, the whispers began again. Calling his name, Vincent took a slow, measured breath. The door was gone. The realization settled into his bones like a sickness. The only thing in front of him was another towering bookshelf, its dust-covered volumes packed tightly together. The whispers stirred again, faint, curling through the still air like smoke. "Vincent." He turned sharply. Nothing. Just endless rows of books stretching into the dim glow of the hanging lanterns. His heart pounded. He wasn't imagining this. "Find it." The voice was clearer now. Closer. A cold dread crept up his spine. "Find what?" Vincent hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached for a book. It slid from the shelf with ease, the dust smudging against his fingers. The cover was blank, like the one that had appeared on his nightstand. As soon as he opened it, the pages shifted. Ink bled and twisted, forming words before his eyes. And then a voice, not his own. A whisper, reading aloud from the pages, October 12, 1992. "The accident was my fault, but no one ever found out." Vincent's breath hitched. That date. It meant something. Something important. His eyes darted across the words as they rearranged themselves, reshaping the memory into something sharper. A road. A darkened stretch of asphalt. Headlights flashing, pain bloomed in his skull. A splitting headache. Vincent staggered backward, dropping the book. The pages snapped shut the moment it hit the ground. His pulse thundered in his ears. That memory, it wasn't his. Was it? Vincent pressed a hand to his temple, his breathing uneven. The book lay motionless at his feet, its words sealed away. But the whisper remained. "Keep looking." His gaze shifted to the shelves. The books were no longer just objects. They were watching. The air felt heavier, pressing against his lungs. Vincent reached for another book. This one was different. The leather was smoother, the spine untouched by time. No dust. No wear. As if someone had placed it there just for him. Hesitation gripped him, but he opened it anyway. The ink spilled across the pages, forming a scene so vivid it felt real. A boy named Elias staring out a rain-slicked window. 10 years old. Waiting for someone who would never come home. Vincent's throat tightened. Elias. The name stirred something deep within him. Something he should have remembered. The pages blurred. The words bled into nothing. And then, just as suddenly, a voice. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a child's voice. "You forgot me." Vincent slammed the book shut, his hands shaking. His mind reeled. Who was Elias? Why did his story feel so personal? The library pulsed around him. He wasn't alone anymore. Vincent turned in a slow circle, scanning the endless shelves. "Who are you?" he demanded. Silence. Then, from the shadows, "You know who I am." The whisper was almost mournful. Vincent's fingers curled into fists. "No, I don't." The bookshelves trembled. A single book slipped from a high shelf, landing at his feet. He swallowed. The cover was black. A deep, suffocating kind of black, the kind that devoured light. He crouched, fingers hovering over it. A feeling of dread settled in his chest. The moment he touched it, his head exploded with pain. Memories crashed into him like a tidal wave. Flashes. A childhood home. A locked door. Muffled cries. A name his own? No. Elias. Vincent gasped, his vision swimming. His real name wasn't Vincent. It was Elias. The books around him trembled. The entire library groaned as if it were alive and reacting to the revelation. Vincent clutched his head. His life, his entire existence, had been a lie. Someone had rewritten his story. But who? A slow clap echoed through the space. Vincent turned sharply. The librarian stood at the end of the corridor. Her hollow gaze was fixed on him, her thin lips curved in a knowing smile. "You found it," she murmured. "At last." Vincent staggered to his feet. "You knew," he accused. His voice shook with rage, with fear. The librarian tilted her head. "Of course." He took a step closer. "Who am I? Who did this to me?" She sighed, almost pitying. "Some stories are too painful to keep," she said. "So they are rewritten." Vincent's breath caught. Rewritten. His memories, his entire life, had been a fabrication. A replacement for something he wasn't meant to remember. "You were Elias once," the librarian confirmed. "But Elias had a past that needed to be erased." Vincent shook his head violently. "No, I want the truth." The librarian studied him, then gestured to the black book still clutched in his hands. "If you truly wish to know," she said, "then open it." Vincent hesitated. The book felt wrong in his grip. It thrummed with something dark, something alive. But he had come too far. His fingers curled around the cover, and he opened it. Darkness poured out. The whispers became screams. The shelves trembled. The library collapsed. Vincent fell into nothingness, into a place outside of time. The book consumed him. And then, in the silence, a single voice remained. "You were never meant to remember." Vincent fell through darkness. It wasn't a normal kind of falling. There was no wind, no gravity pulling him in any direction. It was like sinking into the depths of a void where sound and time didn't exist. And then, just as suddenly as the fall began, he hit solid ground. A jolt of pain shot through his knees as he landed in an endless, white expanse. No walls, no sky, just a single thing in front of him. A boy, 10 years old, curled on the ground facing away from him. His small frame trembled as if he was crying, though no sound came out. Vincent's breath caught. Elias. The boy's head lifted slightly, but he didn't turn around. A sickening, ice-cold dread bloomed in Vincent's stomach. He knew this boy, not just from the books, not just from the memories. He knew him because this was him. "You forgot me," the child's voice came, fragile but full of quiet anger. Vincent's chest tightened. The boy's fingers curled into fists. "You erased me." And then he turned. Vincent staggered backward. The boy's face was his, but distorted. The eyes were black voids, swirling with ink. His lips stretched too wide in a broken, hollow grin. His skin was cracked like porcelain, like something not human. And when he spoke again, his voice wasn't his own. It was Vincent's. "You stole my life." The white space shattered. Vincent gasped as the world reformed around him. The library was back, but different. The bookshelves were rotting. The lanterns flickered wildly, casting frantic, dancing shadows. The ground beneath him was cracking open, revealing nothing but a gaping abyss below. And standing just feet away, Elias. No longer a child. A reflection. A twisted version of Vincent himself. He stepped closer. His grin widened, revealing too many teeth. "This is your last chance," he whispered. "Only one of us can leave." The librarian's words echoed in Vincent's mind. "One of you must remain in the library. The other may leave." A terrible, crushing realization dawned. This place, the library, wasn't real. It was a construct, a prison for forgotten identities. And he was never meant to escape. Elias stepped closer, tilting his head. "You don't deserve to exist," he whispered. The bookshelves groaned, swaying dangerously. Vincent's hands trembled. What was he supposed to do? Give up? Disappear? Let Elias take back what was his? Or fight? But was he even real? Was Vincent ever truly a person? His mind raced. There was only one way out. He had to decide who he truly was. Who deserved to live? Who deserved to be erased? Vincent's breathing slowed. The library trembled, waiting for his choice. He met Elias's inky, soulless eyes. And then he let go. The weight of his false identity collapsed. The bookshelves steadied. The abyss below sealed itself. Elias stepped forward, reclaiming his place. As Vincent's form began to fade, the librarian appeared beside him, watching in silence. "You were never meant to leave," she murmured. Vincent tried to speak, but no words came. His body dissolved into ink, absorbed into the walls of the library. The librarian turned to Elias, now whole. "You may go," she said simply. Elias, now truly himself, stepped through the doors. The library faded away, the last of its whispers devoured by silence. And Vincent? He had become a part of the library itself. The new librarian, waiting for the next lost soul to arrive. Vincent gritted his teeth. "No," he whispered. "I won't disappear." Elias's smile faltered. Vincent lunged forward. The library erupted into chaos. Bookshelves collapsed. The walls cracked. Elias screamed, his form shattering like glass. Memories rushed back, his real childhood, his pain, his truth. He wasn't just a construct. He was both Vincent and Elias. And he had the power to decide. As the library crumbled, Vincent reached for the book with his name. The moment he touched it, the library imploded. Vincent gasped. He was back, sitting in his study. The invitation to the library was gone. The old leather-bound book on his desk had vanished. The memories lingered, but the library itself had been erased. Had it been real? Or just a manifestation of his broken mind? Vincent would never know. But one thing was certain, he was free. Or at least, he thought he was. Until he looked in the mirror and saw Elias smiling back. The story ends. But was Vincent truly free, or was he still trapped in a mental prison? Did the library really exist, or was it a metaphor for his fragmented mind? Either way, some stories were never meant to be remembered. The one who speaks from beneath the water. When Lena saw her name on the deadwood board of the boat, cold snakes coiled in her stomach. SV Lena, it was the same boat her grandmother had mentioned countless times in her thick red diary. The boat's paint had peeled off, and a thick layer of moss covered its floor. But the name, it was exactly as her grandmother had written in a 1998 entry. "Today, I changed the boat's name. Now it's mine alone. He says it's dangerous, but I know the truth is hidden beneath this lighthouse." "This is just as much nonsense as I thought," Lena told herself. Her voice was lost in the sea breeze. The weather on Howard's Island had changed suddenly. The morning had been bright and sunny, but now dark clouds had swallowed the sun. She looked toward the lighthouse, a black, stone tower standing atop jagged cliffs like a wounded beast. Its windows were broken, and the upper room, the place where her grandmother's body had been found. The cover of the red diary in Lena's hand grew warm, as if something inside was urging her to enter. "Why are you here?" Lena turned around. A tall, thin man stood on the dock, staring at her. His eyes looked as if they had been soaked in salt water for too long, red, swollen, and utterly exhausted. "I'm Lena Voss. This lighthouse was left to me as an inheritance." The man took off his hat. His hair smelled of the ocean. "Finn Murphy, I saw your grandmother that day." He cleared his throat. "She didn't leave the lighthouse for 12 days before she died. When we broke down the door, her face." Finn suddenly covered his own face as if a horrific image had surfaced in his mind. Lena tried to steady her breathing. The words from the post-mortem report echoed in her head, lungs filled with seawater despite the deceased being found indoors. "I'm only here for 2 days. Just need to arrange the property documents," Lena said. Finn gave her a strange look, like he was saying goodbye to someone who was already doomed. "Don't turn on the light at night. And keep the curtains closed." And then, without another word, he left. Lena opened the cap of an old liquor bottle she found in the cabinet. Her grandmother had mentioned this place in her diary. "He always hides in the liquor cabinet. He's afraid I'll see him." The liquor tasted sour, but it calmed her nerves. She opened her laptop on the lighthouse's central room table. This room was even more unsettling than her grandmother had described. The walls were stained with seaweed marks, even though the ocean was 100 meters away. On the floor, a large circle had been carved, filled with strange symbols, perhaps a result of her grandmother's investigations. Lena turned to a diary page where her grandmother had written, "He appears to me in dreams. His eyes are like sunken ships. He says he needs more eyes." A sound. Drip, drip, drip. Rain? Lena glanced at the window. The curtains were closed. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was coming from upstairs, the room where her grandmother had died. Lena grabbed a flashlight. The stairs creaked as if someone else was climbing them too. As she reached the top, the door opened by itself. The floor of the room was covered in water. It was as if a bathtub had overflowed. Something black emerged from the water. Hair. Long, wet hair. Then, a face. But it was Lena's own reflection. Yet something was wrong. The reflection's eyes were black, as if the pupils had vanished. And it was smiling. Lena tried to scream, but no sound came out. The reflection extended its hand beyond the mirror, wet, swollen, with blue veins. The flashlight flickered off, and the water started filling Lena's mouth. Lena regained consciousness when Finn found her outside the lighthouse. Her clothes were dry, but her lungs were filled with seawater. Finn had a secret. He knew that the keeper chose a new eye every 37 years. And Lena's grandmother had drawn its image in her diary in the likeness of Lena's mother. 1883, Elias Hargrave, a desperate sea captain, lost his wife and daughter in a storm. When his ship crashed near Howard's Island, he barely made it to the lighthouse. There, he heard a voice from beneath the water. "Do you want them back? I can reunite you, but you must become my eyes." Elias, broken with grief and madness, made a bloody pact. He became the lighthouse keeper, but his duty was not to save ships, it was to lure them onto the rocks. Every drowned passenger transformed into a black mist, trapped in the lighthouse's foundation. The first ship sank, and Elias saw his wife and daughter's water-choked throats slipping through his fingers. He screamed, but water filled his mouth. His eyes burst, replaced by coal-like, gleaming black stones from sunken ships. He became the keeper, a being trapped between water and terror. Not a god, but a shadow. The keeper is merely a tool of an ancient sea force that has been feeding on human suffering for millennia. It selects living humans as eyes to maintain its connection to the land. A hunter of lost souls, the keeper preys on those drowning in loneliness, grief, or guilt. It enters their dreams, drives them mad, and then uses their eyes to strengthen its power. Those marked by the keeper begin to see traces of water everywhere. Water seeping from walls, drowned faces in mirrors, dreams of sinking into the deep. Tide marks, dark veins start spreading on their bodies, like seaweed growing from within. The keeper whispers in the voices of their dead loved ones, "You let me drown, now you must join me." And where there is water, even a single glass, the keeper can manifest. Seawater pouring from walls. Reflections that drown instead of mirroring. Every 37 years, the keeper needs a new eye, a living human whose eyes turn black, anchoring its power. That person eventually drowns in darkness, and the keeper sleeps again until the next cycle. The Forgotten Victims, 1885, the first great disaster. The keeper sank SS Morgan, killing 120 passengers whose screams still echo through the cliffs. 1922, the lighthouse keeper's daughter, Mary Hargrave, drowned her entire family in their sleep. Her last words in court, "He was smiling at me, his eyes were in my teacup." 1959, a priest tried to cleanse the lighthouse. The next day, his body washed up on shore, his lungs full of fresh water, though he had never gone near the sea. Lena's fate, Lena's grandmother, Edith Voss, had been the keeper's last eye. In 1985, she sacrificed herself to save Lena's mother, Sarah. But the keeper didn't forgive. He haunted Sarah's dreams until she took her own life. Now, in 2023, the keeper is awake again. Lena's inheritance is no coincidence. It is the keeper's trap, and her grandmother's eyes are among them. Lena shined her flashlight on the blood marks trailing down the basement wall. They led to a hidden door. Her hands trembled as she opened her grandmother's diary to a page with a strange drawing, a man whose body was made of drowned hands. And then, a whisper from the dark water, "You have your mother's eyes."
Don't forget to tell your horror experience in comment. Subscribe our channels for more scary and horror stories.